It's Wednesday. It's time for another Business Analysis Live. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at IIBA.
And my name is Scott Bennett. I'm the Manager of Business Analysis here at the International Institute of Business Analysis. Today we're going to talk to you about how to hire a business analyst. And we've got a guest today that's going to help us with this topic.
It is one of my, not just one of my very favorite guests. All of our guests are my favorite, but this one in particular is I consider her a great friend, Yulia Kosarenko.
Welcome, Yulia.
Hello. Hello, good to see
Hello.
you again.
And we had Julia on a couple of episodes ago to talk about interviewing for business analysis professionals. And so this time we're going to flip the script, as they say, and we're going to talk about hiring a business analyst more from the hiring manager perspective. So Julia, welcome. Tell people a little bit about yourself because you work in this space of interviewing.
Definitely. Thank you, Susan. Hello, Scott. Yeah, so I've been a business analyst for many years. I was a BA team lead for a while. What I do now is help both sides, as you say. I coach business analysts. I help them prepare for interviews, but I also help companies with building their BA practices, which often includes hiring or finding the right person for the team. And that's a pretty tricky job because it's such a special profession, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
is, and it's a little bit misunderstood. And so I know that we've all known of stories where maybe something didn't go right in the interviewing or the hiring process because it is a special set of skills. So today for those hiring managers, I think we're going to let them in on some secrets so that they know how to better identify and hire really great business analysis professionals.
Yeah, and for those of you who are not managers and hiring managers, you'll sort of get an insight to the other side of the equation, what's happening in the planning and the execution of all this. So hopefully you'll find that interesting in the discussion today as well.
That's right. We'll give them some insider tips. So get your notepads ready. We'll be sharing what we've learned. And as always, we're live. And so we love it when you put comments in to the chat today. And if you're listening to us on one of our podcasts and you have a question or you want to know more about this topic, you can reach out to us at live@iiba.org. And let's see. Oh, you were also letting them know where they can find the podcast. It's Business Analysis Live, anywhere where you find your podcast, Google, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. We're there.
Yeah, that's right. So let's dive in and start at the initial point of hiring. So we'll walk through, you're looking to hire a business analysis professional. It really starts with figuring out what you're going to put in that advertisement, that job description. So Yulia, what are those type of things that people should consider when they're putting this together and the people they're working with within their organization?
Yeah. Hiring process is really time consuming and difficult, and we all want to get those candidates in faster. So I would say you a manager, think like a business analyst, put your requirements in your job description. Don't fill it with fluff about various values and competencies, but tell them a little bit more specifically what would you need them to do, what type of projects they will be working on, and you have a much higher chance of finding the right fit. You don't want to sound it too difficult. You don't want it to sound too generic. Give them a good idea, and then it will be easier for you to do your selection. So be specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the things I know that have been important to me as somebody looking for a job. I want to know things like who will I be working with? Not named specifically, but am I talking with business folks or IT folks? Where will I be working in an organization? I think that information helps the potential candidate understand what their responsibilities might be, the kinds of skills that they need to bring. And the other thing that I've seen in job descriptions is a lot of jargon. I mean, I don't know
Mhm.
about you, but how many times have you guys seen we want to hire a rock star? Well, what does that mean? That's not a I don't know if I have that skill. So what do are there other tips that you give about things to include or maybe exclude
Yeah.
in job descriptions?
I think it's a great idea to describe the team because business analysts can be part of many different teams in different companies, depending on whether it's a more IT-oriented role? Are you going to sit with business? Are you going to be with PMO? Are you a little bit of a consultant? So all of this, I think, is really important to tell the person how will they fit into this organization. So don't forget that. And also maybe mention a little bit about the types of projects they will be working on, because it will be their question anyway. So maybe they will be working on analytics projects or process automation. And, and as a trick for hiring managers, if you include that basic information into your job description, you're going to force your candidate to ask you much smarter questions when it's their turn to turn the questions, because you already gave them the information.
I like that.
Oh, yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, and I think, again, we were talking before we went live today. We were talking about, things that as a hiring manager you want to see in your candidates, and interviewing skills is one of them, because it is literally one of the foundational techniques of what we do. So including information so that they can ask smart questions. Man, I like that tip for hiring managers. That's a great tip.
Yeah, one thing that I use for hiring is, I guess, a minimum standard. So I'm looking at, now I'm coming from a biased position, being an IIBA staff member, but certification. So if I'm hiring someone who's junior, I want to see that they have an ECBA certification, because what that tells me as the hiring manager is they know the language of the business analysis profession. If I'm looking to hire someone that doesn't have that, that's one more thing I need to invest in to get them up and running. If I'm hiring someone who's mid to senior, I'm obviously looking for a CBAP. Sometimes people say it's preferred. Sometimes people say it's required. But those are two good screening mechanisms in order to filter out the people that will be hopefully getting piles and piles of resumes submitted to you.
All right, let's talk about certifications in the job description. Yulia, what do excuse me, do you see hiring managers including those, or what guidance do you give them on certifications?
Mhm. I think, again, they need to think about their requirements. For example, if you're looking for someone junior who is just starting a new job, maybe it's not realistic to expect CBAP level certification. ECBA is more realistic because it's about terminology, but it's also about their motivation. Are they motivated enough that they actually went to all the trouble to do the test, right? Uh, Other than just looking for any job. So think about it. Don't include like 25 certifications in it. Include what you want and say whether it's preferred or needed. If it's more data oriented, again, there is certification for that. So try to think what you truly need. Now, sometimes, and it's interesting, if you hire someone very, very senior, maybe it's not that, you look at it differently, right? Because a person has been around for a long time. Sometimes we are more interested in also industry certifications, say, in addition to that, because you want to have someone with specific domain knowledge. So again, hopefully those managers of business analysts, think like business analysts themselves and try to be as specific, because then you're going to find a better fit.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to make sure, if you're working with an HR department that's doing your pre-screening for you, that you put those requirements in a way that they're not going to knock out the people you really want to talk to. So if you say it's a CBAP is absolutely needed, but you're right, Yulia, there are a lot of professionals out there that don't have that certification because they have so much experience.
Yeah.
Then you
Well,
don't
they
want to
come from a
necessarily
different
read those out.
country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they just have a different acronym in their resume, not CBAP, but something from BCS. So I think that that's very important, and especially because business analyst profession, and Susan, you mentioned it before, sometimes gets mixed up with the financial business analyst, right?
Right.
And maybe someone from HR or maybe hiring agency that's helping you is not really clear and in that distinction, because they both kind of call business analysts. So helping them, or maybe doing that last round of resume reviews is really important, because you as a hiring manager can spot what is fluff and what is specific, what makes sense from business analysis or not, like using that terminology, is that appropriate, or is it just a copy and paste from some magazine?
Yeah.
And
So let's
that,
talk about that a little bit further, Yulia. When you're screening applications, you might have HR that's doing a phone screen, for example, but as the hiring manager guiding them or looking at all the resumes you've got in front of you, are there some screening techniques that you'd recommend for hiring managers?
Yes, what I think is really helpful is, first of all, and I have a video on that. If by the way, you look at how it looks and feels, because one of the things business analysts need to do, and it may sound a little bit petty, but your documents, your artifacts, your models have to look good. Otherwise, nobody's going to look at it. So first of all, look at what the design of that resume. Is it clear? Is it muddled? Is it all full of different fonts? To me, that's definite first screening method. If the resume looks cluttered and unclear, I don't believe that that person is going to create clear documentation. So that's
Okay.
the first out. The second one is having it organized and focused, and the bullets, are they short and clear, or do you have paragraphs running on and on and on? That's another red flag for me, because I want an analyst who is clear, who can express themselves succinctly. If you cannot do it in your own resume, then you're out as well. So I think, especially with business analysts, your resume represents how good you are at capturing information that's useful for me as a hiring manager. So you have to think about me as your client and do things that make your persona come through. So that alone, and unfortunately, even with BA candidates, a lot of their resumes look cluttered, unclean, and unprofessional, and just full of meaningful phrases like "I'm a team player," or "we look for synergies and we use them and we synchronize our ideas." So just all this generic and meaningless fluff, and that's another red flag. So I think maybe my first tips would be what to discard, and then from what's left, look at specific description of projects. Don't just tell me I worked on business requirements, so I captured requirements documents. Name some projects, mention functionality, mention platforms, mention types of groups of departments you worked with. So being specific gives me something meaningful to think about and to ask you in the interview. And again, tells me that you as an analyst understand what I need as a hiring manager.
Yeah.
and
Okay,
I
thank you.
know
That's very helpful.
that is good. I can see Scott. He's taking these tips back when he when he's ready to do his next hire. When we talked about interviewing business analysts, we did talk about focusing on those achievements rather than just the responsibilities. And it would seem to me that as a hiring manager, if you've done a good job with that job description, you should be able to find some parallels and some of the achievements in those good resumes with things that you potentially want that person to do, or maybe things that you didn't even think you wanted them to do, but you think, wow, I would love it if they would do that for me.
Yeah.
So there's that opportunity to map, I guess, in a way, map the achievements of potential candidates into those job descriptions. Um, and I know, we were talking about very often when the screening happens, there's usually two levels. There's the HR screening, which might include some details around eligibility or things like that, like the logistics of making sure that you are a candidate that can be considered. And then that next step, you suggest that the hiring manager, even if they are super busy, that they get involved in those resume reviews and maybe even do that before that screening call happens with the HR person. Is that the timing that you're thinking of?
I think that could be helpful. And if your HR person is just helping you with the most basic filtering, then have a look, because often just, a 30 seconds per resume is enough to at least discard. And then you are going to reduce that short list for your HR person to do the phone screening. So definitely, I always feel more confident when I had a chance to look at those interviews or resumes first.
Yeah. Um, well, let's move on. So we've talked about the screening. So let's now move into the interviewing process. So you've identified those candidates. Um, we've had in some of the webinars that we have done with some of our recruiting partners, we've talked about having a defined process for interviewing. I know one of the very first things that we've talked about is just the time it can take to do an interview. So, what are some tips, Yulia, you might give to hiring managers about timing of interviews?
Yeah, I think we have to be very conscious of the interviewer's time and the candidates maybe looking at other positions. And, as we were chatting earlier, I just remember reading this article about the rule that you need to use for picking the right house. If you have 10 houses to look at and you looked at the first 6 and you think there is one that you really like, forget about the other 4, grab the one you really liked. So I think the same sometimes applies to job candidates. Maybe you have 10 people lined up and you interview the first 3 and one of them really stands out. So first of all, don't try to interview everybody else because maybe your gut feel tells you this is the right person and they may go quickly. The other one, again, plan it efficiently, plan your time in an interview efficiently. If there are some generic questions, ask your HR partner to do it through the screening process so that you don't waste time. Focus on business analysis related questions. If you're thinking maybe about doing a little bit of an assessment or role play, even embed it in your very first interview because it may help you, again, discard the candidates that you don't think they're right early enough, and then tell them. If you don't want to continue, tell them, let them know so that they follow, and just look for something else. Be efficient with everybody else's time because sometimes it's just like, a few things that the candidate does either make it or break it. So try to do that as much as possible.
Yeah, these days, I feel like with the job market being as it is, you really do want to be efficient with that interview timeline because somebody else could get that same great candidate. Great candidates are not going to last long. So, to your point, if you think you found somebody who is a good fit, expedite expedite
Yeah.
your process so that you can get them in.
Yeah, we no
Um,
longer have the luxury of hiring over 3 to 4 weeks, right? The
No,
market
no.
pressures are out there, so we need to move
And again,
efficiently.
I think good candidates, and funny, I've heard that feedback from one of the candidates we just hired. Good candidates actually value the company that is efficient with their responses. If I
Hmm,
were being interviewed for a position with a company and they always dragged on and I would never know where I am, I might just not want to work for them because it may be a very good indication of their culture that I don't like.
true.
yeah, that's a great point. And I know at one point in my career, I think between virtual and in-person interviews, I was up to about 8 to 10 hours of interviewing for a position. And when the HR person called me back and said, "Oh, well, the CIO would like you to come back and do this," and I thought, I don't have that much time. Like I'm not getting paid for this.
Yeah.
Um, so I did just have to. I had to cut my loss. And so I think again, perhaps they just weren't sure about me. Perhaps that was just their hiring process. But to your point, I did think about that company differently after that because I just thought it was so unnecessary.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. So
yeah,
let's move on and talk about, Yulia, before we started this podcast, we were talking about hiring assessment. So we've gone through the process, you've narrowed down, maybe you've got 6 candidates. What do you do with that information? And what you were describing earlier around maybe trying to interview all 10 and not going with the ones you've interviewed so far sounds a bit like analysis paralysis, right? You want to know all the information
Yeah,
to make the
yeah,
very best decision. Maybe
yeah.
that's not the best approach. So what would you recommend for the assessment in terms of those candidates you've got in front of you?
So hiring assessment, I think, is like show me instead of telling me. So if
Okay.
imagine someone tells you, "Oh, I'm so great at interviewing stakeholders and at diagramming and all of those things," why don't they show you? Because again, sometimes you see someone who can talk really fluently, but then you ask them to do a very basic process flow and it looks it frankly look unprofessional. So I think it's a very, very good test of what candidates can actually do,
Okay.
especially if you want them to get on board and start working. It could be as simple as giving them a scenario of three sentences, and on the fly, like within 10 minutes, ask them, how would you go about starting business analysis on this problem? Or how would you plan your analysis if you were given this initial problem statement? It could be giving them a half a page scenario and asking them to create a process flow or a few user stories based on what is there, or create what they think is the most appropriate diagram to describe what they are reading.
Oh,
It
okay.
could be a little bit of a role play where you say, okay, pretend I'm a stakeholder and you want to find out 1, 2, and 3, like what kind of questions you would ask. So even it's especially helpful if you have two candidates and they both sound nice, but you don't really know which one will actually work better. And
Yeah.
then you compare, you give them the same task and you compare, and sometimes it's a drastic difference. But even if you just have one, I would say it's still worthwhile. Because again, business analysis profession, a lot of people are really good communicators. Maybe that's how they became business analysts. But we don't want that good communication skill and ability to talk to be the only thing they're good at. Because in interview, we can judge someone who is really good and smooth talker, but can they actually do a diagram? Can they actually listen to me and extract some useful information? So I would say that practical assessment, even getting them a draw a diagram, is just super, super helpful and can open your eyes on what they truly can do. And some people, by the way, are not that great talkers, but they can still be excellent analysts, and you can get it through this like mini assessment.
That's great. And
Ooh.
I'll just mention that Yulia, as you can tell from her experience that she's sharing with us today, wonderful guest, thank you, Yulia, actually has a course. Yulia, you want to mention a little bit about what this is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a lot of coaching, especially during the COVID when we were all virtual, mostly preparing candidates for interview, looking at their resumes. But I know it's very difficult. And now we came back to office. It's very difficult to arrange times and meet. And sometimes it's just costly. So I recorded a video course because I realized I give similar advice to my clients over and over and over and said, hey, that's for exactly where you create a course. So this course is like your recorded coaching for preparing for an interview, where I'll share with you how to prepare for specific interview questions. And the key part of it is you record yourself and then you watch the recording and you try to evaluate it as a hiring manager and try to really improve your own performance, because sometimes you have a friend to help you or a coach. Sometimes you have to do it yourself. So definitely, if you're interested, I have a discount code. We can share that later, and just do your own practicing.
I love the idea of filming yourself being interviewed and watching it. And I know that it is tough, but I will tell you, there is nothing that opens your eyes quite like watching yourself performing.
Yeah.
Scott and I know that.
Yeah,
So, but
for
but
sure.
I think that it's really important, because when you watch yourselves, you not only see where you maybe aren't answering things well or you're not looking confident, but because a lot of our interviews these days are virtual, you can also see if you can watch your body language and see if there are things you are doing which could be distracting. So that I think is a really great tip.
And for the
Um,
discount code, what we'll do is we publish this recording on YouTube, and there's a spot for description. So we'll put the link and the discount code in there. The YouTube video will be up by the end of the week.
yeah. I'll also have it over in the podcast description as well, if that's how you choose to listen. Um, let's see. So, thinking about the interview process, and the different kinds of things that might be involved. I know I was asking you the question earlier, how much of the interview process or interview mechanics, logistics, do you want to disclose up front, or do you leave it more for explaining that later on to your candidates? When's the right time to tell them what they're getting into with this interview?
I'd say that maybe just a general guideline is enough, because sometimes you have to be flexible on the go depending on the pool of candidates you have. Maybe you like someone really much that you don't want to even do a hiring assessment. Maybe you feel like you really need that assessment because you're unsure about someone. So again, business analysts need to be adaptable and flexible. So I think it's okay to put them just a little bit on the spot, even during the interview. Say, hey, do you mind if I give you just a quick scenario? Maybe just before interview, you'll tell them, hey, please make sure your chat is enabled because we may share a business scenario with you that we want to discuss. That should be enough. I think giving homework probably is already passed after we've gone through all our virtual phase. And sometimes it just takes too long. Plus, especially with BAs, we want to judge how quickly they think on their feet and react to situation. Because this is exactly what will happen in real life. You go to requirements workshop, someone drops a bomb, and you have to analyze it on the spot and ask them question and act cool, right? So that's a little test.
Yeah. Susan and I are both laughing because we do this live stream, and there's some gaffes that happen. It's live.
Yeah. So you really do, I think, and that you can be resilient and come back from that, I think,
Yeah.
is such an important quality that business analysis professionals should have. I mean, if you fall apart, this probably is not the profession for you.
That's
Um,
right. That's right. You have to survive any meeting, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, why don't we take some questions? Let's see. We've got a couple of comments and questions from our audience. So let's see what we've got over here. So Subir asked, how can a software developer move to business analyst without any relevant experience in business analysis? And so maybe since we're focused on the hiring manager role today, how if you knew you were hiring or looking at a potential candidate who was making that move from software developer to business analyst, how might you alter the interview process for that person?
Hmm. First of all, and I want to say that to Sabir, if you are a software developer, there is no way you have no relevant experience. You already have some because you were reading requirements written by someone else, you were assessing them, you were probably asking questions, and maybe sometimes you just go and ask your clients. So you always have a little bit of relevant experience, even if you come from a different area. But I'll say, as a hiring manager, if you know, and by the way, this scenario also applies to reskilling. If you're a hiring manager, you don't always have to look outside. If you need a business analyst, well, maybe someone in your company wants to upskill to business analysis. So ask around in development team, ask around in your QA team, put an internal post it. And then, first of all, you look at how they communicate. Can they read requirements? Maybe give them a couple of user stories and ask them to assess whether they are complete, whether they make sense. So because good software developers are able to judge the quality of requirements, right? And just look at their communication skills.
Yeah.
And I can attest to this as someone who has actually done this. So I'm going to date myself here, but I was a certified Lotus Notes developer before I became a business analyst back in 1998. So there definitely is a transition that you can go through. And you're right, Yulia, you've got the skills because you've seen some people do that. The easiest way the way I experienced the transition was working on the same technology, but working on a project with another business analyst and start doing that role and learning from that professional as we went through. So my strength was I knew the technology we were working with. The skill I was working on was building up that business analysis skill set.
Yeah. And you can ask for, say, 2-3 months placement. If you are in the same company and just be an apprentice, so, that's a new term, be apprentice. So why not, right? And again, we have to be open-minded because we need more business analysts. So just know what your requirements are. If you can invest a little bit of money in training this person, if you have senior BAs on your team who can mentor them, maybe bring them into the interview so that they meet during this process, they can give you good advice as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are all good ideas. And I think that the other thing is potentially you could make that move easier in your own company. And just think about every day that you're working with a business analyst, you're kind of role modeling potentially what you are doing as a developer and how that, that could translate over into business analysis work. So good luck, Subir. I think you've got this. All righty. So our next comment here is, could you show an example of a good resume? And so I don't think we don't have any resumes ready to show today, but how do you answer this? Maybe both from a hiring manager, like how would a hiring manager know what a good resume look like?
Clean, logical, structured, easy to follow, helpfully bolded keywords that you can find easily. Whatever is the most information important for me as a hiring manager is at the top. You can find it clearly. There is a goal. So I do have a video on that, on how to filter business analysis resumes. I can share that. But it needs to be just as you imagine you prepare an elevator speech for CEO, or you prepare one pager when you go into Dragon's Den, or you have 1 minute to persuade someone to give you $1 million. It has to be clear, precise, to the point. And yeah, definitely have a listen to my video. I have lots of tips there.
Yeah, I was going to say you have a number of videos on interviewing skills and other kinds of preparation for getting that job. So your website is an excellent resource for that. So Olga, check out y-change.com. Okie doke. Next one here we have from Tatiana. Is it important for a BA candidate to attend conferences from the hiring manager perspective? What do you think about that? How important is it for them to have participated in events, conferences, and things like that? And is that something that a hiring manager should be looking for on a resume?
So frankly, this one is difficult, Tatiana, because attending a conference really depends on how generous your employer is sometimes, and some employers have that budget or not. However, there are many alternatives. So I wouldn't really judge based on the conferences that the person collected, even though it is a fantastic experience. And if you did go, definitely mention it because it shows your motivation. But there are other things you can do. There are local IIBA chapters. So to me, that's very valuable. Participate, go to their webinars, maybe volunteer, helping to volunteer in some other organization as a BA, just attending events that are maybe a little bit easier than conferences. All of that counts, right? But definitely, if you can, especially if the conference is in your location and it doesn't involve travel cost, definitely try to do that. And I think IIBA has helpful resources about how to persuade your managers that this is a good investment, right?
We do, yes. In fact, we do have some of that. And I think that's a great plug, by the way, for participating, finding your local IIBA chapters, because if traveling is expensive and if you are, if time or money is a concern, if you've got a chapter that's local, you can participate very easily for very little cost. In fact, if you're an IIBA member, being part of a chapter and participating in chapter activities is free for you.
Yeah.
And I do think that it shows if you are actively involved in whether you are a volunteer or whether you simply participate in their activities. I think it shows a level of commitment to your profession. So for hiring managers, as you're talking with candidates, asking them about, well, what are the things that you're doing to stay up to date, to upskill, to whatever, and in things like participating in chapter events is one of those. And by the way, there's tons of chapter events that happen every week. Our chapters are always so busy with fantastic events every week of the year. So you can check out our chapter events calendar on our
And
website.
I also want to take the opportunity to mention BBC. So BBC is an annual conference. Building Business Capabilities is what BBC stands for. And Susan and I are both going to be there in 2 weeks. It's in Las Vegas. And Susan and I have been doing these podcasts, these live streams for 2 years now. And we have literally never met each other in person. And so we're going to Vegas and we're going to meet each other in person for the very first time. So if you want to go to that conference and meet us as well, you're welcome to it.
You'll be meeting us while we'll be meeting each other. It'll be great. And Yulia, I am so disappointed I'm not going to get to meet you, but it sounds like you and Scott will maybe be able to meet each other at PMBA World. Are you both going to be at that one
Toronto?
in Toronto?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I'll be there. Looking forward to meeting you, Scott.
Sounds good.
Alrighty. So our next question here, Coyote, is certification a true test of competence for hiring a BA? I feel like we get this question quite a bit.
Yeah. So as a hiring manager, I look at it as someone has met a certain threshold. Someone can be book smart and they can get certified, but they might not have 100% of the soft skills that I'm looking for. But it certainly tells me they've gotten to a certain point in their career in terms of experience, and they have a certain amount of knowledge that's the foundation that I'm looking for. It doesn't mean someone certified they're going to get the job. There are a number of other things that we're looking for in terms of soft skills, how they interact with people, how they interview, how do they work with tools, how do they understand the various business domains. Are they a curious person by nature? Curiosity is part of I wouldn't say it's a skill, it's a trait.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a number of those things that I'm looking for. So certification is not you're going to get the job. It's for me something that certainly helps screen out the people that have that foundation and potentially not.
Curiosity is part of the BA mindset as well, right? That is a little bit harder to judge, but you need to have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you've got a whole book on that, the business analysis mindset. And I know we've also had Fabrizio Laguna on here who has also talked about the BA mindset. And it really, I think of the BA mindset, it's really kind of who you are. It's how you approach life in general, and then how you can apply that to your own work. Perhaps sometime, Yulia, you need to come back and talk with us about
With
about
pleasure. It's
yeah.
my favorite topic because mindset is a difference between an average BA and an excellent BA, right? The one that truly solves the problems.
Yep. Yep. All right. So let's see. Maybe just a couple of more questions or comments here. So Kim says, I ask how many interviews when the recruiters contact me, and anything over 3, I politely decline. Uh, hey, you know what? Given my experience, that's a pretty good guideline, Kim. So that might work for some folks as well. So we've got a question here from Paul Kesh. Does a BA need good project management skills? He says yes, but what do we think? Would that be something that hiring managers might look for? Project management skills.
It's nice to have, but then you know what? A project manager competencies are also different in terms of you're so focused on regimentation, on activities, on scheduling, on doing things in order. It's your job to track that. While business analyst sometimes is chasing these challenges, the difficult things. So sometimes even the same person is doing 2 jobs, but there are times where business analysis and PM have a little bit of a conflict of interest. I don't mean personality conflict, but when schedule of the project may be a little bit of a in a conflict with the gap that business analysts discovered. Where I say, okay, if we go with the schedule, we'll get it done, but it's not going to be the right solution. But if we address this gap, we probably will get a better solution, but we're gonna not fit into the schedule. So I would say that it's always good to keep this separate. It's just, like executive and legislative power. There is a reason why there are 2 separate bodies doing that. Same here. But of course, it's nice to have, and it's good to be organized and step in, if your PM is going on vacation.
Yeah, and
Well,
I'll take that question a little bit from a different angle. I would say you don't necessarily need quote unquote project management skills, but you definitely need to be organized. And there are certain points when you're working on things, you need to plan things out.
Yeah.
So you do have to have some planning skills. I wouldn't say project management skills, but some planning skills, some forward thinking skills, and be organized in general.
I know of some organizations where they do blend this role of BA and project manager. And I think if that is your organization and how you've structured that role, then I do think that the hiring manager needs to disclose that, because it is a different skill set. I have worked around project managers. I was for a time working on a project management certification, and it really it diverges at a certain point, and it really is 2 different skill sets. So I think that is great advice. So how about maybe just one last question? This one caught my eye from Archer. Can you apply for BA jobs while you're studying? So maybe whether you're a student or you're working on a certification, what do you think about that? And how might the hiring manager ask that question about what they're studying?
Mhm. Interesting. And some hiring managers probably want to consider, giving an internship opportunity to someone, because you know what, hiring someone full time, A, is hard. B, has a lot of HR implications, and sometimes even once you get the person in, 3 months down the road, it may turn out that maybe they don't like it, or something else doesn't work. So I think that if you are considering expanding, maybe have a couple of internship positions for 3-4 months. You do a good deed and help students maybe explore this as a job. And at the same time, maybe this is a pool of your future candidates. So it really comes down to whether you have capacity and resources to nurture that. Because I think if you are so busy that you're not going to give them any attention, maybe it's not fair to them. But on your hand, Archer, if you are a student, definitely apply if you see the opportunities, disclose that you're studying, say that you look for an internship, say you want to explore more. And again, if you find a manager that values your motivation, then that's a good fit.
Great
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah, that is really good advice. Well, thank you. So it looks like we are just about at our time today. Yulia, it has been another fantastic session with you. We always love it when you come on. I'm looking in the comments, and boy, there's been a lot of comments in LinkedIn today with all kinds of questions. So we want to thank everybody for asking those questions. Now, normally, Scott, this would be the point where we would talk about what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks.
Yes,
But
that's
in
right.
2 weeks, you and I will be at BBC, and we're doing a keynote speech, so which will be happening at this time. So we'll be around in 2 weeks. I'm not quite sure what the topic is, or
Yeah, we're working through some technology, and we're going to see if we can stream that for you, the audience, so people around the world can watch. But there are some technical things that we need to work through, so I'm not sure if we can pull that off. But in 2 weeks, if you do see it pop up that, hey, we're doing a live stream, hope you can join us.
yeah, hope you
I'm
can
going to
join
look
us.
forward to that for sure.
Yeah. All right, Yulia, thank you again for joining us today. And everybody, we want to thank you for joining us. And we will see you all soon.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll leave another one right here for you to help you in your business analysis career. If you haven't subscribed to the IIBA YouTube channel yet, you can click over here and click on the bell icon to get notified every time we publish a brand new video.